I'm pleased to be joined by Brian Baumgartner and Ben Silverman. They are of The Office. Brian played Kevin. Ben was, well, actually, he had a role, but he was also an executive producer and one of the brains behind the show. And they're out with a book based on the beloved TV series The Night Before Christmas at Dunder Mifflin. Brian, Ben, welcome to The Gist.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us. I thought we were recording before. Your listeners just missed a big talk on education. Yeah.
We solved Pell Grants. We put our brains together. Yeah.
Theater programs, the arts.
Yeah.
In 3 minutes.
Was crazy. Ben came down for charter schools, and Brian came over the top and smacked him down in the name of unions. I don't know. Do I have permission to air that, or is it going to hurt your reps?
Sure, guys, you can, for sure.
Volatile. Where's Betsy?
Okay, so I have, Ben, I do have questions for you, but I want to start off with two quick ones for Brian. Question one, what's the capital of Arizona?
Oh, my God. I can't believe that that is such like a deep, dark fade. I'm going to say Phoenix.
And my question to Ben is, do you know why I asked him that?
I don't. I'm not even connected to that one.
Go ahead, Brian. Tell us.
Yes, I was on an episode of Jeopardy. Now, let me just say this. I swear to you, this is a true story. On my way, because I have a drive, I don't live in Los Angeles proper anymore. I was talking to my sister, and I was like, there's just so much potential for me to look like an ass here on the Jeopardy. And I specifically said, well, like, I knew all the state capitals at one time, but what, Delaware? Is this going to come up? Or like New Hampshire? Is this? And sure enough, she's like, oh, no, that will never happen. Sure enough, the capital of Arizona, which should be one. I got too tricky with it. That's all I have to say. I got too tricky.
To be fair, first of all, your batting percentage was pretty good. I think I looked up the stats. You got something like 17 right and 3 wrong on the whole show. So you did mostly well. But
it's all about the button.
It's all about the button. And to be fair, you'd think Phoenix would be the fake answer with city capitals, right? It's almost never the big city, except, of course, you did grow up in Atlanta.
It's Albany. Usually
right.
there's an Albany.
Exactly. It's not Los Angeles. It's not even San Francisco. Right. It's not San Diego. Right. It's Sacramento. So I was just like, oh. And here's the other thing is, they must not talk about it very much because, like, you're in Atlanta and it's mentioned. There's the Capitol. Right. Look at the beautiful dome. I don't know where the Capitol building is in Phoenix. That's the thing is I've been to Phoenix a lot. And I was like, in that moment, I was like, never heard of that being the Capitol. Can't be that.
Yeah. Also, anyway, to be very fair, and you might have a case, did they mean now or did they mean from 1868 to 78, in which case Tucson, your answer would be correct.
Oh, wow. I love that detail.
Nailed it. Nailed it.
So, okay, now here's my second question. Ben, I'll let you field this question. This is an important one, and it's a literary
London.
one. What is your second favorite poem written by Clement Clark Moore?
Oh, wow. You've nailed me. Thank you so much. 'Twas the day after Christmas. the Boxing Day poem. I need the second poem. What is it?
I don't know. I think, from what I understand of reading about him, the poem was written in or published in like the 1860s, and it was 13 years. It was anonymous. I don't know why it was anonymous. It was 13 years before anyone took credit. Yeah. It wasn't shameful or anything. I don't know.
No, I mean, it's like, it's beautiful. What a strange thing to have not wanted attribution for.
And then he did, but then there was some sort of fight over whether he wrote it. But he is pretty much the founder of Chelsea, New York, or at least his family is. And he named, I didn't realize this until doing research for the show, he actually named all the reindeer. That was him.
He's a Christmas icon.
Yeah, he's the guy. So why did you guys want?
I know specifically, Mike. I'll field that question. I will tell you specifically. I assume that another poem by Clement is also in the public domain. So let's just say that
Book two?
is another possibility. We'll find it.
It's about the War of
Santa Claus
1812.
with much delight. Old Santa Claus with much delight, because you asked Ben. I found that. I don't know. Is that a different one? I think it might be.
So how'd you guys decide to collaborate on this idea?
Well, we had collaborated on our previous book, which we got to be on your show and discuss, and is an awesome book kind of talking about culture and how the show came to be, and with interviews that Brian initiated on his podcast that is, deeply actually kind of educational for anyone who wants to learn how a television show is made and how hits are made. And we had so much fun doing it, and also saw what a great response the audience has. But as Brian pointed out, as we were exploring this, it's really a gift for the fans. It's something that they can take and actually own and keep in their house and have on their bedside table, or in this case more like the kitchen table, because it's a family book. And the other thing that we were watching with the show is it continually had new young audiences. Unlike other shows that are kind of rewatched by the same fans of the original, this show gets younger and younger and gets discovered by the children's of fans, and now by the grandchildren of fans. And so we thought this would be a great way to kind of bring everyone together and connect to the show multi-generationally, just as they do watching it. And so we were very excited to bring it out, and we're seeing a really loving response. And Brian has done unbelievable work in the animated world and found our incredible illustrators who are brilliant Oscar winners. And why don't you tell them about that, Brian?
Yeah, I had the great blessing to work with Glenn Keane. Now, you may not know the name Glenn Keane, but Glenn Keane is an Oscar winner. He won the Oscar for Dear Basketball with Kobe Bryant. Prior to that, he was an animator at Disney. And as it has been explained to me, the old school animators at Disney were like responsible for a character when that thing. And so he was the animator for The Beast. He was the animator for The Genie and Aladdin and Little Mermaid and all of these other things. And so I worked with him on this show Trash Truck, which was on Netflix, which if you haven't checked it out, you probably don't have young kids. But it is beautiful. And that's what I kept saying to people when it finally came out. I was like, forget about my voice. Like, this is all about how it looks. And he and I became friends. And when we had the idea to do this, he was like my first, second, third, fourth, and fifth calls, which it took that many calls to get him to agree to help us out. He's incredibly busy. I'm not going to leave that for him to discuss, but he put us in contact, and he worked in collaboration with us, with Mael, our illustrator, artist, every step of the way. And that was the most fun for me, was being able to work with those guys something I've never done before. Every week, having those meetings and talking about the illustrations, which I think in this are beautiful.
In Trash Truck, you play Walter, the big bear, right?
That's right.
And you say he did The Beast, and he did, what was the other one that you named?
Well, so he, in all of those, so, you have like the original Disney, right, which is like Snow White and all of that. So he was in that the Renaissance, right? So Little Mermaid, Aladdin, The Beast.
Right. He did Aladdin. These are big, large, actual endomorphic characters, as are you.
Yes.
Is that his specialty? The big characters.
I don't know. That's a really interesting question. I don't know if he would define it that way, but his imagination is incredible. And before he even agreed to say yes, we had about an hour phone call. I was actually away with my family, and I am pacing in the snow in Wyoming as he's talking to me. and he's literally talking about character traits from the characters of The Office and going through each character and identifying that, which is like, so what is the trait of this character? What could we latch onto to not imitate, but to exaggerate and focus? Just the whole process of that is amazing. I have trouble with stick figures and like houses with windows aligned properly when I'm drawing. So it was just so interesting.
Shadowing
to me.
Shadowing is difficult. No,
so
I don't know
what did he say to illustrate figuratively and literally, and also literally, figuratively? Really sorry about that verbal cul-de-sac there. But what did he do to bring out and illustrate character traits of these characters who you've both known for many, many years that maybe you never saw, but as soon as he said it or as soon as your discussion led to it, it was really illuminating to you? Maybe even about Kevin himself.
Well, one thing he started with is being a fan of the show. Right. That's why he did it.
Yes.
So he was wildly familiar with these characters and had been an avid watcher. So understanding their kind of texture and nuance and dimensionality was something that he came to readily. And I think that's why he was willing to do it, frankly.
Right.
You know, so that helped kind of amplify the truths behind these characters in their animated or illustrated format. And when you have the book and you see the book, you're going to immediately recognize them. But obviously also in illustration, there's some caricature. And so somebody's nose may be bigger than normal. Somebody's eyes may be droopier than normal. And you may have that kind of physicality over amplified, but it relates to character. Mm-hmm. And one of the things the show was so extraordinary was how good our actors were. I always talk with Brian about the Murderer's Row performers on the show and how deeply they embedded these characters, and these characters became family for the audience, but also family with each other, but also their texture and depth and growth was really, really cool. And so I think you get a lot of that from Glenn's relationship to the show.
Yeah. And just specifically, I'll just talk about Kevin for a second. Yeah. I mean,
what do you know about Kevin?
Well, no, but in terms of, I don't know that it was something that he told me that I didn't know, but there's a way that and part of it is Kevin in our story does take a particularly childlike role within it. And the way that he talked about the expression, the movement, which is so bizarre, right? Because it's a still image. There is literally no movement. But when you look at his drawings, you see the movement, which lends itself to be childlike or something. It's very difficult to understand. I will share with you this little story, which I can't even remember now in all of these conversations we've had about the book that Ben and I talked about it. But when Trash Truck ended, he did a drawing for all of the people who did voices. So he did a drawing of Walter the Bear. And Trash Truck is about a boy who his best friend is a trash truck. So his other friends are animals that would live around maybe a dump or a trash truck, a bear, a raccoon, a mouse, whatever. And so he did a drawing of Walter that was around a bunch of trash. And he had like 4 Easter eggs, including like little cans of chili, like embedded into the drawing. And I wasn't even fully aware of what a fan he was, but he had created this. It's now on the wall of my office. It's one of my treasured possessions.
That's amazing. I think that when you get a character and can bring out core characteristics, it shows you how rich and deep and textured the characters are. But also, and Ben and Kevin, you can both speak to this. Sorry, Ben and Brian, you can both speak to this. There we go. There's something iconic about a lot of the Office characters. And so they are multifaceted, but they're also of a type, and they are consistent within their type. And that is the sort of thing I find that makes for great characters. And it's leading me to another point, but is there something about when you guys in the writer's room were talking about it, the iconography of some of the office workers?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we looked at. There was a British show before it that informed it.
Yes.
And we realized we had to make it for the American vernacular. We had to make it for the American office, and those kind of people that if you work in an office, and I've had the privilege and the pain of working in an office for throughout my adult life, is that you do have people who are phoning it in. You do have people who are overly passionate. You do have people who are still looking to be the teacher's pet, but in this case, within the office world. So there's absolutely types that permeate the real world that you look to connect to, because specificity is so important in both comedy and storytelling. So I felt like you see a lot of that, and hopefully you recognize a lot of those people. You have your Dwight, you have your Kevin, you have, actually there's not a lot of people like Kevin, but you have a lot of those elements within it. And then you have guys like Daryl. Like, I think the upstairs downstairs of the show is so deep, the kind of various arenas that people work within the workplace,
and it's also
is
such
really
an
cool.
inversion of what we would usually think about who has their shit together.
Who's the smartest?
Yes,
Exactly.
Yes.
No, and we reverse it 100%, and then we weave in things that are like we're taken out of the discourse, but around it's a much easier and better way to kind of deal with the real world challenges that people have. Like, who is the smartest guy? Why is he there? Why is the other guy there? What are the advantages people show up with when they step into a work life?
And then actors, of course, bring maybe things of themselves to their characters. But was that more embraced on The Office than in other shows you've done or worked with?
Oh, 100%. I mean, look, I mean, one, I'll follow up on Ben's point and say everything he's saying is exactly true. And in addition to that, one of the reasons it's successful is it's taking centuries-old comedic universal comedic types and translating it into the current world, and exactly what Ben is talking about. So it's these characters in one form or another have existed for generations, literally. But with the specificity that Greg brought to this, I mean, look, this is ultra realism, right? Like, this is in a way like intended to be more realistic than reality television shows, because the way that people look, the way the camera moves around, what it's capturing is what makes the show. And the other thing that makes the show is, and this came from Greg worked on SNL, it was really important for him to have that collaborative process, which I think for Ben and other people made it really difficult in terms of the amount of time it took to film, and very expensive. But like, he wanted the writers in performing. He gave opportunities for the actors to write, or to, in my case, direct. Like, he wanted conversations to happen up in the writer's room, before every season. And then when, a particular important arc was coming up or something needed to be discussed, I mean, there really was no boundary. And when you compare that to other television shows where literally there is a boundary, because the writers now sometimes aren't even in the same city, but even before that, were, maybe they had offices at Universal and you were shooting at a lot in Culver City. And if you're not familiar, those are 20 to an hour apart, 20 minutes to an hour apart. So you're not walking next door into Greg Daniels' office, or the writer of the episode's office, or to the writer's room, or to the editing bay, and having a conversation about how something worked or didn't work, or what we could do forward. So that was very unique for this experience.
Yeah.
Well, and also Brian can shoot a basketball and hit a golf ball. He is a world class athlete, and you saw that as he hit that shot in one shot.
Yeah.
Well, what about the cadence and the speech, which people hearing you now maybe wouldn't guess that this is how you talked? How'd you develop that?
That he got a scholarship to one of the great schools in America. You didn't expect Kevin to be a scholarship recipient.
Well, I mean, look, the initial breakdown, right? So when a part posts to audition for, I'll never forget it because we joked about it. Me with my manager at the time. The breakdown said the only thing spectacular about Kevin is that he is spectacularly unspectacular. And so the joke between my manager and I was, how do you pitch this to a casting director?
Right.
I've got a guy who is so unspectacular.
You have to just experience the charismatic void that he is.
He is so unspectacular. But look, it ran for 10 years. So things develop. And so, what started... and part of what Ben was talking about in terms of bringing over the British version, there were, an equivalent for Jim and Pam and Michael and Dwight and Ryan the intern. And then other than that, it was really just Stanley and Kevin that came directly. So the character of Keith was the original.
Keith Bishop, right? Became
that's
Kevin
right.
Malone. And those were one of
Correct.
there were people in the background that maybe you could find connections with. But yes,
Correct.
he was there all along as a type.
As a type. So it was that's where it started, right? And then where was it going to go? And I think that the writers fell in love with as we began working the childlike sensibility of Kevin. And so, look, they did 13 episodes and we did 207. And that was a big part of it for Greg. Originally, Greg wanted to do 207. And so he wanted a deep bullpen of people. So those were not just add-ons here, Angela and Meredith and Phyllis. And I mean, he wanted more stories to be able to be created. And so intentionally, he made it bigger. They didn't have someone specifically that they had to, those characters that they were adapted from. So we started with Keith, and then we went our own way.
When did you or anyone figure out that there was an overlap between Kevin and Cookie Monster?
I mean, it was all just sort of gradual in a way. I mean,
You weren't channeling him. He wasn't a source inspiration. He wasn't on your vision board for him.
He was not.
I mean, Cookie.
But I have to tell you, Mike. Like, I think that for me, the whole experience. I mean, I didn't know Ben Silverman before this. I had just moved to Los Angeles 3 months before. I was a theater guy. This is what we were discussing before the show. Like, I was a theater guy. So for me, the idea, and by the way, the two people in the cast who came primarily from theater were me and Rainn Wilson, who played Dwight. And I think I mention that because I think you can see some similarities. For me, the idea of when creating a character, physicality, voice, posture, wardrobe, shoes, like all hair, all of those things, for me, as someone who came from the theater, that's a part of it. Like that's an intentional part of, Kevin made, as Ben just mentioned, 13 baskets in a row from 15 feet extended. That was Brian, by the way, more than Kevin. But like, if you notice, and these are things I don't expect you to notice, but he was wearing a suit. I was wearing a sport coat, which I never took off essentially in every single scene. And we discussed it because, again, as you're creating these archetypes and then you're finding that ultra realism within it, there is an archetype for Kevin that's existed throughout sitcom lore forever, right? And there would be ketchup down the front of his shirt, probably a little too tight, untucked, like disheveled, like not put together. And I was like, well, what if that isn't the kid? Like, what if he's wearing a suit coat and a tie and Dockers and he's doing his best? And his best may not be great, but that's his best. And he makes an effort and he shows up. And again, trying to create contradictions from what you would expect in a quote unquote Kevin character. To me, those are the things that you continue to find. Not so much about Kevin wearing a coat all the time, but those things, they enter your consciousness and bring a richness that you just don't find most of the time.
It's probably crazy for me to tell you guys this, but there's this theory of comedy that what is comedy other than benign violations? So, in every knock-knock joke, there is a twist or a turn. And with a character like Kevin, the benign violation is you think he'd be a slob and would be terrible at sports, but boom, he nails 15 in a row. It just...
Correct.
But another great thing to compliment you in the show is that the reason we were allowed to experience that was 207 episodes, but also the daring of the writers. Usually, there are stock characters who are in the background and maybe given a line and are just used for, he's this guy and he does this thing and he does this thing always, right? Humor as, and this is another theory of comedy, that they are a blank machine. He is a slovenly machine. This guy is a lust machine. She is a fret or worrying machine. But with The Office, because they tried to, and you tried to make it more real, we saw them as real people and we actually got comedy out of that. And that's not always the easiest thing, right? You usually, comedy writers, you tell me, Ben, want to have 100 jokes for the slovenly guy and that's fun to write. But if you make the slovenly guy not slovenly, it's a little bit harder.
Well, you also have to remember the form of this show. It was a, no audience, right? So you were used to these 3-camera proscenium kind of shows where you laughed before the character, actually spoke a word. The character would arrive and you laugh because they wore that lust engine or that fret engine that you discuss. And they were caricature and they weren't real. And it frankly wasn't smart, right? It was just like an easy play in an easy way.
They could be. At the epitome of the form, Carla from Cheers or Norm from Cheers, you'd cut to that and you'd get the laugh.
Cheers and Norman Lear, with parentheticals. Obviously the great ones were exceptional, but you really, in general, had a whole sequence of very mundane from a intellectual level and from a kind of comedic masterpiece level coming out through the 80s, 90s, and aughts. And we really, because we were no laugh track, no audience, faux documentary, this ability to kind of go where the camera went and to go into these characters with more depth, and also in turn to showcase them with more depth, to give them a broader life, to have 3 dimensions to them. And I think it's one of the reasons people fell in love with the show, because they felt smart, like they were in on that character's deeper side. They were in on that moment. And so I think people felt like they owned that. It was also post the era of like Baywatch and Beauty being the defining factor of every show. And here was a show that kind of showcased the ordinary things in such a way. Brian always talks about the last line of the show and how we connect to the beauty in these ordinary things and these regular people, these people that we know but have fallen in love with, but actually they're exceptional. And then we show you how they're exceptional. Creed was in a rock band, Kevin can do X, you discover all of these secret talents that hopefully we all possess, that are more to us than just the version of us that you may see in The Office, which is one version of us.
Right. It's very humanistic and very uplifting. But let's, just for a second, tell me about if it was hard to evolve to that place. Because I'm thinking of great sitcoms. We mentioned Cheers, but take Taxi. So in Taxi, I'm sure you'll...
Love Taxi.
Right. Such a great, well-written sitcom. Couple of the characters were allowed dimensions. Judd Hirsch, Alex Rieger was, and Elaine Nardo was. But then you need Lotka being funny foreign man, and you need Louis being, mean guy in the cage.
Ignatowski.
Right, and you need Tony Danza being the dumb guy. And over the 10 years or whatever, 7 years of that series, each of the ancillary characters maybe got one personality trait that was a little surprising. But you guys totally blew that away. And my question is, was that always intended from the start? Was there like a fight with the suits at NBC, of which I think you became one, right, Ben? But, was that hard to do and accomplish or even conceive of?
Do you know what? Once we started to get momentum, there wasn't as much pushback on the creative because it was all so fresh. The original cycle of the show, there was so much resistance and there was so much pain to get even an episode ordered or 2 or 3. There were so many moments that we were like, fine. It was like somebody kind of passive aggressively being like, fine, do what you want. This will be over soon enough and we can move back to our normal style of television and comedy.
Yeah.
This will fail, but we're giving you this shot as long as you do it for less money and with less resources. But then over time, as it started to pick up momentum, they started to be like, oh, maybe these guys know what they're doing. And they gave us a little more runway to do it. But I do think all along, Greg and the writing staff were like, we want to service these characters, many of whom were the writers, right? Mindy Kaling was a writer. BJ Novak was a writer. Paul Lieberstein, who played Toby, was a writer. So you also had them in that room wanting to service their own agenda as well and their own little portion of The Office, right? You had the portion where Jim and Dwight battled. You had the front end of The Office. You had the kind of headquarters. You had the accounting department. So there were all of these little pockets of shows within shows that could be serviced. You had the warehouse. And so all of that really opened up these little set piece zones for work and comedy and character depth that I think are so profound and work so well in the show. And I think as part of the reason it became so successful, it wasn't the normal 5 characters and that's it that were the kind of CBS comedies and the others that we knew on ABC. This was a hallmark also of NBC. NBC was the place that had Cheers. It was the place that had these kind of St. Elsewhere and Hill Street Blues. It came out of that history where you could really do more adventurous stuff.
Yeah. And do you think there are many reasons it's beloved, the acting, the writing, but 2 of the reasons are people's connection to the characters, but it just occurred to me as you were talking, The Office built lore and they engaged in world building, and that's actually where TV went, right? If people talk about the world building of TV, they'll probably think of, I don't know, Westworld or some prestige show on
Right.
HBO, but man, did The Office, you could have a map, a big sprawled out map of the Scranton of The Office, and you could populate it
We
with
did
real
not only that,
Honest.
we did webisodes all in the accounting office with a murder, like during our summer after our first season.
Yeah.
And Brian actually won an Emmy for those. We did a thing called the Dunder. We basically did this Dunder Mifflin, infinity thing online. We were one of the first to have our characters in character on Facebook and MySpace as it launched, and to kind of showcase them in greater depth. And we had our actors actually writing in character to their characters' profiles. We did all of this work to kind of further ground this and showcase it in really unique ways that was absolutely what Game of Thrones did years later.
Yeah, and I do want to say, Mike, you bring up an interesting point in terms of building the world, and I, for my podcast, which then became the first book that Ben and I did together, Welcome to Dunder Mifflin, Greg talked to me about this, and so the only episode that is a direct American version, but the episode is essentially the same, was the pilot.
Uh-huh.
And Greg and I talked about that. And he said there were a couple of reasons. One, he thought if the words were the same as the British and the British was a success, he'd get less notes from the network. So that was one. But two,
Right. It's like,
he
what do you know?
wanted
Look, we're just ripping off the
Exactly.
BBC, and then these Americans are
Exact-
like, well, they are British.
Exactly. But two, he wanted to spend that time on building the world. And through the whole first set of episodes, again, this is not cheap. This is more expensive. All of the actors were at our desks at, let's call it 7 a.m. before we shot, and they would shoot 30 minutes of B-roll, which means 30 minutes of us sitting at our desks working. Non-scripted, little exchanges. Sometimes it would make it in, sometimes it wasn't. But what it did do was it built the architecture of the space and what people were doing, not in a performative way, in a very, again, that sort of ultra real way. And so to bring it back to the book, because this is one of the things that I talked to the illustrators about when the first drafts came in. They were beautiful. They were great. And I said, guys, I can't tell where we are. Where is this drawing? And I talked to them about how important for me the architecture of Dunder Mifflin was, because anyone who's reading, most people who are reading this book understand where it is. And sure enough, the very first image now in the book, as we're entering the book, we're entering Dunder Mifflin, and you see Pam at her desk and Michael's office and the painting on the wall and Jem and Dwight's clump, and then everything's sort of in the background, but you immediately see the architecture. And then halfway through the book, he was like, oh, this is what you want? Well, then I'll give it to you. And he does an aerial shot from above with a bunch of stuff going on, where you literally see the layout in plain sight there. And again, was he doing it like, oh, you're going to keep giving me notes about the architecture? Well, here it is. And so he went in, Mael went in and was like, would watch the show to make sure he had the right angle, the right perspective, of his drawing within the space, because that was so important to me, because I knew that would be so important to our fans.
Right. And that is why this book is not just an example of let's strap the jumper cables up to the corpse of the dead body and try to get 10 more volts of juice out of it. This is the sort of thing where I sense that fans just want to connect again to these characters that they love, and I can hear now that you guys really enjoyed revisiting it.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say about that is, it was as Ben said before, it was a gift, but it came out of a real thing that I kept hearing from people interacting with me on social media or in person, was that whereas when I was a kid it was the Grinch, and it was Frosty and the Rudolph.
Yeah, all the Rankin Bass,
those are the
iconic stop motion Christmas specials.
Correct. And then A Christmas Story and Elf. It starts to evolve. And what I kept hearing was, The Office means so much to our family. When I go home for the holidays, we watch The Office Christmas episodes. Like, that has become our family tradition. Those episodes are special, not just to us, but I know to a bunch of the fans. And so really setting it here at Christmas, putting it is meant to give a gift for people who not only love the show, but are participating and using it during the holiday season.
And what about intellectual property? Do you have to pay your former castmates, or does Universal own their rights forever?
It's a license deal with NBC.
Oh, man. And do you need Silverman to work out that?
Of course. Of course. That's a big part of my job around here. That's what the producer does. The producer ensures that things get produced. The producer produces.
He's the real hero, after all. We thought it.
Yeah.
We thought it was Toby, but it was you the whole time.
Oh boy.
That would be funny. Every character is the hero of their own story of The Office, and just to see like an Angela pass about what's going on in the office, and a Toby pass.
That's right.
The name of the book is The Night Before Christmas at Dunder Mifflin, and it's co-written by Brian Baumgartner and Ben Silverman. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Mike,
thank you so much,
Appreciate
Mike.
it.